Welcome to the Luke Macias Show. Men are still going into the bathroom, into the ladies' bathroom. I mean, men couldn't go into the bathroom. All men go into the bathroom, but men are still going into the ladies' bathroom in the Texas Capitol. We have a Texas congressman who was an absolute legend this week. Gambling is completely dead as a doornail. And there are several other things going on in Texas politics, so let's get to the show. Yesterday, I was in the Texas Capitol and I happened upon several females, two different females who had both been in the ladies' restroom recently and run into a man in the, someone who they believe is a man. I don't know if y'all know this, but there's we know literal confusion with just the, powers of plastic surgery and just how significant the trans-industrial complex is and how many people are falling prey to this mental illness and then being pushed into it. And so you're just running into people left and right at this point that you're trying to figure out, is this person supposed to be in the women's restroom? And the sad thing is that if we just said men cannot go into the women's restroom, then this would not be an issue. But currently we know men can in the state of Texas. And for those of you who do not know, this goes back to Speaker Joe Straus. Joe Straus killed the Privacy Act, Women's Privacy Act, filed by Lois Kolkhorst and pushed by Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick at the time, that would have said that men cannot enter the women's restrooms basically in private spaces. So the bill specified anywhere where there's a reasonable expectation of privacy or that women could be in any way in the state of undress, locker rooms, bathrooms, etc. And so this bill ends up basically bringing the session to a head. The Texas House kills it. And that was just its own separate saga in the past, 8 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever session that was, that we were fighting for the Women's Privacy Act. And I haven't looked it up to remember, but I do remember the fact that the Texas House stood in its way. And if that bill had passed then, we wouldn't even be having this discussion now. But as y'all know, we had an episode where we sat down with Claire, who is on Andy Hopper's staff. She's 18 years old. She had a man come up to her in the restroom and say, "Hey, that's nice hair," and start having conversations with her. So I went to the women's restroom and just clipped this 20-second video. Let's just go to this clip real quick.
If you can't read this, this is the women house personnel only. But here's the thing. There's a guy in there, okay? Multiple female staffers have confirmed. There's a man in there. So Republicans in the Texas Capitol, wake up. Can you please get the men out of the women's restrooms?
So that clip gets 25,000 views. Yesterday, and just, multiple different discussions happening. I was in a completely different hallway, completely different area of the extension when I ran into another female staffer who stopped me and said, "Hey, I saw your video." I said, "Yeah." And she goes, "Was it at this bathroom?" And she points to the bathroom in her hallway. And I said, "No, it was in a different bathroom in a completely different area of the extension." And she said, "Well, I ran into a man in that bathroom too." And so this is the problem. This isn't a one-off instance. This isn't a two-off instance. This isn't this one thing that happened that people are blowing up. This is consistently happening because you have a lot of leftists in the Capitol, okay? The Capitol is a center where people of both political ilks congregate to advocate for policy that they care about. And one of the strongest political forces in the Democrat Party is a movement that believes that men can be women, that men can turn themselves into women, and then therefore enter private spaces of women. That is probably the single strongest political force in the Democrat Party right now. So guess what? The Texas Capitol is going to experience even more men going into women's private spaces than you would experience if you just went into the county courthouse or city hall. That's just the reality. And so the question is, what are we going to do about it? Now, I'm going to give you a couple great points of information. As a result of this story and others really blowing up, you've seen the members of Texas House leadership all sign on to Valerie Swanson's bill. And I will give Valerie Swanson a lot of credit for this. She has worked on this issue for a long time in the Texas House and clearly worked hard to advocate for this bill, even in the early parts of the session, because she has well over 75 co-authors. I think she had like 78, 79 last time it was published, or last time I looked at it several days ago. And so quite a few people are saying, hey, we're going to sign on to this bill. And if that bill passes, Mays Middleton has filed the bill in the Senate. Valerie Swanson has filed the bill in the House. If that bill passes into law, it will be signed by the governor. The governor supports that policy, and then it will go into effect in September of this year. It will not protect any women in the Capitol today. And so it is very important that we continue to make sure that we are advocating and bringing light to this issue until, one, the law passes and passes quickly. We don't want the Privacy Act to pass on the last week of the session and take up time that could be used to pass a bunch of other Republican bills. Let's just get this done. A majority of the chamber supports the bill. Just move it. Let's go. So we will, of course, be keeping you up to date on the status of that legislation. I do believe it will pass this session. The question is going to be whether it just passes now because it already has all the votes to pass. Let's just deal with this issue, or whether they delay, and take these bills they know they're going to pass and scrunch them up into the last portions of the section. You're seeing them do that with school choice already. School choice had a hearing last night that went late into the night, but they've had the votes to pass school choice for weeks, and the Texas House has kind of intentionally put this delay game on. If you could pass school choice mid-March or pass school choice at the end of March, which would you do? Well, if your goal was to pass as much conservative Republican policy as possible, it would be mid-March or early March or February. As I've said in previous episodes, they literally could have taken this bill up the second the governor designated it as an emergency item, but they didn't. If your goal is to pass a limited amount of Republican policy, and you're trying to figure out how much Republican policy do I need to pass so that it's harder for people to run against me in a primary, but also kill enough stuff I can show Democrats all the stuff I killed. What do I need to do? And in that case, you would push school choice as long as possible because you already know it's going to pass. Why not just wait another week, another week, another week? And that's what's happening. And that's what they're doing. But it will be done in short order. Going back to this bathroom situation, though, I do think that what you will see is a policy passed that says men cannot enter women's private spaces statewide in government buildings, in public schools, in the Texas Capitol, in any of them. But in the in-between, there has to be action taken. I'm so grateful for Representative Andy Hopper, who stood up and said, something needs to change here. Something needs to change. I'm going to try to address this. And it's just very encouraging. I can tell you, being in the Capitol, it's so encouraging to have so many conservative Republicans on the Senate side and on the House side advocating and pushing to accomplish as much as possible this session. It is changing the tone and tenor. And ultimately, it will then fall on the speaker and his top lieutenants that he's put in positions of power as to whether or not they want to shift with the clearly shifting legislative makeup, or whether they still want to just kind of let a limited amount of stuff through and kill the rest. I don't know what's going to happen, but I will keep you updated every single week, because every single week we're going to get a more clear picture on what stuff is moving and what stuff is not. Mike Alcott has legislation that will put the 10 commandments back into classrooms. And there's you kind of question whether or not leadership is going to let him pass this bill. Often leadership will look for Republicans that are, voting with Dustin Burrows and what he wants them to do more often and try to give them the bill. But Mike Alcott rolled out 80 co-authors yesterday on his legislation to put the 10 commandments into public school classrooms. Fantastic work that he clearly has been putting in. And what that does is it sends a signal that says this bill has the votes to pass. There's no reason to delay. There's no reason to hold back. Now, on the flip side, what you're seeing is that there is some legislation that is in even more dire straits than anyone thought. And that would be gambling expansion in the state of Texas. And so when it comes to gambling expansion in the state of Texas, Representative Carissa Richardson sent a letter to Chairman Ken King, and he is the chairman of State Affairs. And before I explain this letter, I want to give you some context. Last session, the Texas House took up an entire day of hearings in State Affairs. And think about the way the timeline and clock work. You know that State Affairs Committee is they had their first set of hearings on bills yesterday, okay? They're not hearing a ton of bills at a time. So every single hearing they have on legislation is vital time that's getting taken up that other bills could pass. And State Affairs has a ton of huge, big bills. But last session, they took an entire day to have hearings on gambling expansion legislation and then sent that legislation to the floor, knowing at the time that that legislation would die in the Texas Senate. So why would the Texas House spend 2 entire days on the floor and 1 entire day in the most important committee in the Texas House debating gambling expansion? One, because they're spending, gambling interests are spending tens of millions of dollars on lobbyists and tens of millions of dollars on donations. And so you're trying to show support for this policy. And secondarily, to eat the clock up. Every day the State Affairs has a committee hearing on something that is not going to pass the Senate. It's not having a committee hearing on conservative policy that would pass the Senate. And if you spend a day debating gambling on the floor of the House, then that's a day you're not having to debate another Republican policy. But casinos never got to the 100 votes they needed. Sports betting passed by 1 vote. I talked about sports betting a number of weeks ago and just the dangers of sports betting. I'm actually convinced at this point that sports betting is worse than casinos, and that is not an endorsement of casinos by any stretch. I'm very opposed to casino expansion in Texas, but I think legalized sports betting is even worse on society, harder implications on Texas families, will destroy even more people, and will target them in an even more sinister way. So Representative Carissa Richardson sent Chairman Ken King a letter, and the key of the letter is that the people that signed the letter all represent flips on the issue of gambling from last session. The incumbents that signed the letter who voted for sports betting were Representative Tony Tinderholt and Representative Ellen Troxclair, and then Representative J.M. Lozano voted for casinos and sports betting last session and has taken the position to oppose expanded gambling. Absolute win for Texas. And by the way, I'm just going to remind you, as grassroots conservative Republicans, just because your Republican state representative votes on an issue that you do not support does not mean that they are forever in that position. And that is something that I think we, as a conservative movement, often believe. It is a problem. It's just something we need to acknowledge, that we tend to say, if you're not with me on an issue, then you never will be with me on that issue. And that is a much easier position to hold in politics. I'm going to be honest. Okay. If somebody votes to impeach Ken Paxton, it's a lot easier just to say this person supported the impeachment of Ken Paxton and will just always support the impeachment of Ken Paxton. That is an easy position to take. You could even say it's a rational position to take. This person supports casinos. They're a casino supporter. That is true. That is factual. That is in context. But you should also be open to the possibility that through conversations and relationships with different legislators, you could change their mind on an issue. Lawmakers are getting 100 different inputs on any issue on any given day. So sometimes they come down wrong on an issue and are willing to reconsider their positions in future legislative sessions. Please keep that in mind. Because I'm telling you, outside of session, when it's a little quieter, if y'all put a group together and sit down with one of your legislators, your legislator as an example, and say, hey, we appreciate you voted on this. We like how you voted here. We like how you voted here. There's this vote you took that we're very concerned about. Here's how we read the bill. Here's what we think the implications are. And let's say the bill passed the House and died in the Senate. You would be surprised how many of your legislators who are Republicans will look at that and say, you know what? That's a great point. I'm not going to vote for that bill next time. And now you have a commitment. from that individual. So just think about it. And I know some of you will say, well, Luke, my state representatives are Republican. They won't even meet with me or anybody else on any issue. Yes, that is a problem. And that is their decision. If they decide, I don't want to engage with my constituents, I don't want to talk to you about issues, I want to take a position based on what the crony lobbyists want me to do, and then I have really no desire to engage with my citizens, you have no option but to oppose that person politically and try to get a legislator who will actually listen to you. But there's middle ground in between having a super hardcore conservative fighter who's going to fight for you every day and having a guy that's completely shuts you out. There's some legislators that fall in the middle. Okay. The others are freshmen who are incoming freshmen who defeated liberal Republican incumbents who support expanded gambling. Okay. And for them also to take this position is very encouraging. Casinos were in the 90s. Sports betting had 101 votes. Sports betting now has votes in the 80s. And I will tell you that I have personally talked to quite a few Republican legislators who oppose sports betting and casinos, but oppose sports betting as well, which is probably the issue that has a little more traction this session, who aren't sure they want to come out publicly right now, but have told me and others, I'm a no on sports betting. I think sports betting is in the low 80s for votes right now. I think they're in the low 80s, 84, 83. And I think casinos are at like 80 or maybe 79, 78 votes, and they need 100. So why would the Texas House spend their time doing this? I don't think they will. That's my hope. I'm really, 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 really grateful for Representative Carissa Richardson. And if you're in Collin County, you should be grateful for her to have had such a significant upgrade from Frederick Frazier to Carissa Richardson. We sometimes don't stop to just consider what it looks like to have a Texas House that doesn't have Frederick Frazier and has Carissa Richardson, doesn't have Justin Holland, has Katrina Pearson, doesn't have Reggie Smith, has Shelley Luther. It's substantial. It really is truly significant. And it will have an impact on the session. There's a reason that Mike Alcott has 80 co-authors of the 10 Commandments bill, and it's now very clear that bill's going to pass. And that's because there's so many more conservatives in the Texas House. We are going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
America is at a crossroads. Now, more than ever, Texas must step up and lead the country. We don't have time to mess around. The only way to save America is with a strong Texas. You and I know this, but so do the enemies of life and liberty. Therefore, you and I have no choice but to stand up and fight. I'm Sarah Gonzalez, and to the enemies of liberty, I say, come and take it.
Guys, we have an absolute legend representing us in the United States Congress, and that is Congressman Keith Self. Now, Keith Self is different than some other congressmen that you will see a lot more. This is not against those congressmen. I love Congressman Ronnie Jackson. I really appreciate Congressman Wesley Hunt. I think Congressman Chip Roy has done a lot of great things for the conservative movement. So, these are congressmen that even the average Texan, most of you listeners to this show will say, oh yeah, I know Ronnie Jackson. Oh, I know Chip Roy. I know Wesley Hunt. But I'm telling you that Congressman Keith Self from Collin County is a legend. And we are going to go to this clip to understand just why that is.
I now recognize the representative from Delaware, Mr. McBride.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ranking Member Keating, also wonderful.
Mr. Chairman, could you repeat your introduction again, please?
Yes, we have set the standard on the floor of the House, and I'm simply...
What is that standard, Mr. Chairman? Would you repeat what you just said when you introduced a duly elected representative from the United States of America, please?
I will. The representative from Delaware, Mr. McBride.
Mr. Chairman, you are out of order. Mr. Chairman, have you no decency? I've come to know you a little bit, but this is not decent.
We will continue this
You will not continue it with me unless you introduce a duly elected representative the right way.
This hearing is adjourned.
The late William F. Buckley said a conservative is someone who stands athwart history yelling stop at a time when no one is inclined to do so or to have much patience with those who so urge it. And here's the reality. Yes, many of you and I and many politicians say a man cannot become a woman. But then when you're actually there to look and say, Mr. McBride, to a man who believes he's a woman that every Democrat in Congress believes is a woman, is actually bold. And you look at it and go, this shouldn't be bold. This shouldn't be so courageous, but it is. It's just willing to say, I'm not going to play your game. That is the attitude that Republicans need to have in the Texas House of Representatives. That's the attitude Republicans need to have at the courthouse and in city councils and school boards and across the state. Just stop playing the games that Democrats want you to play, guys. Congressman Keith Self, thank you for standing up for Texas. We are so proud that you are representing our state in the halls of the United States Congress. Guys, I hope you'll have a great week. May God bless you and may God bless the great state of Texas.
Be sure to subscribe to Texas Scorecard on YouTube and click that bell to ensure you're a real Texan. If you liked this video and want to see more citizen-driven journalism, be sure to click like and go to TexasScorecard.com to read about all things Texas. Texas Scorecard, real news for real Texans.